Hello, East Glenville Community Church. This is Jessica Munn, and I am here with Pastor Mitch for episode 5 of So, I Have a Question. And this week we're looking at both the talk on Sunday, what month is this? October 10th, and Sunday, October 17th.
Right.
So, Mitch, thanks for joining me again.
Oh, yeah.
So before I jump into my questions, though, I actually want to start with kind of a sentiment. And it's something that I've heard a little bit in my small group, but I have been really enjoying this material and learning a lot. However, I can't seem to just take what I've learned and go apply it yet. I can't bring it with me and be okay, I know how to handle my next argument. So can you kind of explain where we're at and maybe where we're going in the series? Are we going to get to that point?
Yes. I get the sentiment, and I've had a few others express kind of similar ideas. And so first of all, this is difficult material, and to apply it, the reason I can't just say, well, do this, this, and this, because it's also situational. Mm-hmm. And if I would give you a general blanket, do this all the time, then there would be situations where it wouldn't apply, and it could actually lead you astray. So I think the helpful thing for me when I first started engaging with this is hearing lots of examples and being able to sort of categorize in my mind when is it applicable and when is it not. And that's also why we're doing the discussion groups. Mm-hmm. It's not like I have some grand wisdom, or even that this training is so thoroughly encompassing that all you need to do is study it and you have it down. Hearing from others and how it's applied and misapplied, hearing how we tried and failed is sometimes helpful. But to get where you're going, it is methodical in where we're going. So we started with just talking about the nature of conflict, what gets it going, what's it do, the kind of damage it does, some of the background to it. That was the first message. Mm-hmm. This last message is how do we tend to respond in negative ways, and first introducing how might we try to respond differently. Mm-hmm. And then the next 4 messages are really those 4 points that lead to what we can do versus what how we tend to. So there are going to be different examples and stories that might start filling out how do I respond in these situations.
Okay.
So
thank you. Yeah, that's helpful.
There you go.
Okay. With that, so I'm gonna start with the sermon on the nature of conflict. So that was 2 weeks ago, and my first question is, you were talking about how we see the first example of conflict in the Bible is really right after the fall in Genesis. Uh-huh. We see people throwing blame and making excuses and pointing fingers. But one of the things is that you had said that before the fall there was no conflict. But I'm sure that doesn't mean that Adam and Eve always perfectly agreed. So what would the ideal of a world without conflict maybe look like?
Yeah, it is hard to imagine. And really, we look forward to the day when there will be differences without conflict. And so, in some ways, it might be easier to even look ahead in the eternal city, in the kingdom that it talks about at the end of Revelation, it says we bring all our differences into that city. The kings of the earth, come and bring their gifts into this eternal kingdom. So I believe God will bring together people of all nations, tribes, and tongues. So there'll still be differences, and yet there won't be conflict. And what might that look like? And I mean, I can only guess, but we would defer to one another. We would set up others for success. We would, if someone says, well, I really think this is the way and you think otherwise, you would have the humility to consider their idea and not fight for your idea necessarily, though, you might still also have the inner confidence. No, I really believe this is the right idea. So how does that look like in reality? That'll be fun to see.
Mm-hmm.
How could it look like? How can you have disagreements and differences without conflict? And that's what we're supposed to model, what that could look like.
Mm-hmm.
And so I have a question for you.
Yeah.
Have you ever seen like times where it came close to that?
There's not like a very specific example. I know that.
So I can, maybe to spur your thinking,
Mm-hmm.
the times where I've seen it is usually, you and I both share the parachurch ministry times. Yeah. And so Young Life would have camp assignment months. And I remember when an assignment team was really spiritually tuned in and listening to one another, you could really have a functioning smaller group of people and just each one defers to the other. And I've seen that. Mm-hmm. And now it never lasts, right? You know, but that's part of the thing is those are short-term mission opportunities are the closest I've ever seen that happening.
I was going to say some of the examples I was trying to think of if I could get a specific one, but I know that like in university when I was in college, me and my staff worker, and when I was leading that, and then my staff worker was also one of the assistant pastors at the church I went to, and I lived with him and his wife. And so between my church and that ministry, I think I've seen a couple of like good conflicts handled well. But I couldn't I can't pinpoint one, and I think several of them it's more of I was like way on the outside.
Okay.
So it's more like a secondhand.
I see. You weren't in the thick of it.
Yeah.
And I guess what I would emphasize is it was that for that short time, everyone is so focused on the kingdom work that they do set aside their own selves more naturally.
Yeah.
At least for a time.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so another question. So you talked about the 3 triggers of conflict. They were like God-given diversity, misunderstandings from failed communication, and the third was selfish attitudes. And to me, a lot of these sound like, specifically 2 and 3, sound like the human condition. Like just like that is what sin looks like. So I was wondering what your thoughts were. Well,
I'm going to argue with that a little bit because, I mean, I think it is the human condition, but none of those are inherently sinful. They arise in a world that's broken, but misunderstandings, both people could be in a sense without sin, but they still miscommunicate. It's to be tired and grumpy is not in and of itself a sin. Mm-hmm. We all get tired. We all get grumpy or have that attitude. It's what we do with it. So I guess what I would say more is it sets up the conditions in which sin can take root.
That makes sense.
Just as God had said to Cain, sin is crouching at your door and it wants to have you. Mm-hmm. Right? So those are things that that's when sin is crouching at our door.
Yeah, no, that does make sense. Thank you.
There you go. It's good to have a definitive answer for a change.
Yeah. Every once in a while. Okay, so next question. You mentioned the idea of worldliness, which was the idea that the world captivates and shapes us. And so is there a way that we can mitigate the world's influence on us completely without withdrawing or never leaving Christian circles?
Okay. Did I use the word captivates? Because I don't know if I did, and otherwise that's a good word.
I think you did.
Okay. Well, if I did, in other words, you might have captured it even better. But the world captivates us and shapes us. So, yes, that is the challenge of Christianity. Jesus said, "You're in the world, but don't be of the world," and that's always a tension. How do we do it? One is be aware of both tendencies: the tendency to huddle and shut out the world.
Mm-hmm.
And if I was trying to convey something in the Jonah series,
Yeah.
I think that idea, the idea that Jonah was supposed to have compassion or give thought to the Ninevites, even though they were the enemy. But the idea of huddling versus the idea of letting the world just shape us and form us. So one is be aware of both tendencies. The other is I think, the call to have a devotional life where we regularly bring our life before God. And we're not just studying the Bible, we're bringing to God our life and the things we've done. I do a lot of journaling, and it's thinking through, this is what happened, and I'm letting, in a sense, trying to give God permission to speak to that, or being ready to hear what might God say about how I spent my week.
Yeah.
And I think that's helpful on that as well. And so I have a question again for you.
Yeah.
What does worldliness look like to you? How would you picture that? Because I wonder if it is a little different generations. Like, what does worldliness look like? This one person might be different to another, but also younger versus older.
Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of it, for me, it's like the norm. Like, what do normal people my age, how do they view and think about and respond to the world? And I think for me, I see a lot of that in, like, shows or like television or, what series I'm watching type of thing and my peers are watching.
Okay.
Or like how they're responding to political things. So I think that for me is like, for me, I just assume that worldliness is the norm, and then I look to see how Christianity is different. Yeah.
Well, it's not a bad way to go. I guess the answer I was thinking, what would I say?
Yeah.
Would be the person that's so caught up in getting ahead that they will do whatever it takes.
Okay, I see.
Stomping on other people. Or the one who's so concerned with getting the comforts and security that that affects how they treat others.
Yeah.
So captured by the goods of the world.
Yeah, I could see the desire for comfort and to have be able to have fun is definitely some things I've seen.
Yeah.
Or want to enjoy life type of thing and not necessarily.
And anyone who gets in the way of that, you're willing to. That's almost the idol that you're seeking.
Yeah.
That will cause you to lash out at people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to then move to this past week's lesson, which was on the slippery slope, as you called it, and you talked about the two main kind of human responses that we see, which is either when we encounter conflict, we either attack or we escape, or you said like the fight or flight scenario.
Yeah. And just to clarify, like on the thing, there are good responses, peacemaking responses. It's where do we fall off into these attack and escape responses.
Right. So the diagram's almost like a hill, and then when you get too far close to the edge, you slide down the slippery slope.
Yeah, because once you start going down them, you tend to go further down. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So when most people, or at least for me, right, when I think of somebody who like gets angry easily or anger management or something like that, I think of somebody who attacks primarily. And so I'm assuming that that's a general kind of cultural view of that, like, most people just assume, like, oh, if they anger management problems means you, like, punch your fists through walls or something like that.
Right.
So I was wondering, is there a way that we can get better at noticing when we're doing escaping? Because I feel like it's more subtle, and then... or like settling for the fake peace, as you called it, where we're we're just avoiding it and we're not actually reconciling and dealing with it.
I think there's all kinds of escape attacks almost. There's the whole silent treatment. I will not talk to that person. I will be very cold to them. Mm-hmm. And that is... it's kind of a combo in some ways. You're distancing yourself but it's also a subtle attack. There's avoiding people. I refuse to sit on a committee with them, or I think there's, as far as showing anger,
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of it is the whole let's mock them in front of others, whether it's slander, mockery, just generally putting them down at other occasions. So I think there's all kinds of ways it happens. And I think it's so much easier to see in others. And, how do we notice it ourselves? We have to listen to our own words.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if we always do that very well. Like, if we find that we're avoiding someone, we should be asking ourselves why.
Mm-hmm.
If we're saying things that are negative about someone, hopefully we would learn to catch ourselves and say, well, why do I even, why am I thinking that? But even more, why would I need to say it?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think on the more subtle terms of, am I trying to get people on my side against that person? Mm-hmm. I think that's one thing that this training has got me conscious of is when I'm speaking ill of others, it's almost like the first sign. So our words are a big key.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, thank you.
How have you seen people either attacking or what I was talking about? How?
Yeah, I have seen, I remember my sister had one friend who was chronically known to do the silent treatment. And so, like, you couldn't tell if she was just having a bad day and just, like, didn't want to talk, or if she was giving you the silent treatment. And if you didn't know how to fix it, it used to throw my sister nuts because, like, I can't tell if I'm in bad standing with you or, like, and if I'm in bad standing with you, I don't know why, and you won't talk to me, so I can't resolve this. So I've seen that before. I've seen some of the avoiding, and I think as you were explaining it, it's like almost a passive aggressive, like, attack.
Yeah.
Kind of a, like, I'm gonna just, like, drop hints that I'm not happy with you. And, like, say little snippets and comments and here and there, but not actually outright say what I'm thinking.
Yeah. And I guess I'm an observer of people. So this is maybe not how I'm doing it myself. But so I remember long ago when I was brand new to ministry, I had a guy that was taking me around to this other ministry. And he was just very critical of how they're doing things. And critical of the people who were in charge of it. And, like, what my thought that went through my mind is, because he was sort of on one of my board, and I'm like, is he going to be doing this to us when I do something he doesn't agree with? And that's sort of what occurred to me at that time.
That makes sense, yeah.
And I think realize, we talk about, I someone else asked me about this, like, well, sometimes I have escape and attack. Sometimes we do flip back and forth. And in fact, it's quite common to escape, deny, and then it's like the yes, and then all of a sudden you're on full attack mode.
Yep.
And that's when you see things blow up. Right? I put up with this as much as I can, so now I'm going the other direction. So I have a question for you. What's your natural, where do you tend to go first?
Yeah, so this was actually one of the things I wanted to bring up too, because, so for me, it's a little bit situational, but typically I'm an escaper by default. Unless the reason I'm mad is because I think you hurt people I care about. Then my default is to attack. Which is a fun dynamic that I have learned about myself.
Yeah.
But I definitely, if somebody else attacks me first, it's more likely that I will also meet, like, their level. So if they're escalating things, I'm gonna follow suit and match them.
Okay.
And so it does for me often depend.
Right. I think that the marquee thing is someone did something to you. And they don't even realize it.
Yeah.
How do you want to handle it? Is it, I need to go talk to him and get this settled? Or I'd rather just avoid this and put up with whatever.
Yeah.
That's the area where you could tell. And I know I will tend to put up with it because I hate opening a Pandora's box if I can avoid it.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it would see, when I was a kid, my sister would be the one who would get into screaming matches with my mother, and I would be the one who would go and run in my room and hide.
There you go.
So definitely more escape.
Yeah.
By default.
Yeah. Or one way of escaping is let's just not talk about this. Let's do something else. Let's change the subject.
Yep.
So when it needs to be dealt with.
Right. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so one thing that intrigued me was you tried to make the clarification that escaping isn't necessarily the same as like taking a healthy pause or break in between resolving or, having an argument. Can you kind of dive a little deeper into that? Like, what's the differences? How do we know maybe when a break would be very helpful?
So, I had a couple different answers that occurred to me on that. The first one is just, it's not directly answering it, but I've learned for myself, when I'm confronted with new ideas, I need to think about it. And I've had people critique me, and I'll argue with them about it, but I'll also think about what they said, and then sometimes, they have a point. So even in the initial conversation, I won't be receptive, but I'll process it. And so that's not quite what I was talking about, but I think that's one dynamic I've seen for me. When I'm talking about when a thing gets heated and you feel the anger and if you're going to say something, it's just going to make it worse. You could tell you're ready to go into attack mode. I think that's the time for a pause. And how do you tell the difference? Well, one is you got to make sure you're not using that as a weapon or a tactic. Sometimes you could do that because it will actually bother the other person to put that conversation on hold. And so you're using that as just one more way to dig at them. And the other factor is being willing to set a time to talk. Saying, right now I'm very frustrated and I'd like to think about this and pray. Can we talk about this tomorrow after work? Versus I don't want to talk about this, or
right.
Being indefinite.
Don't worry about it. Just ignore it.
Or
Okay. Thanks.
Yeah.
Okay, so another question. So you focused on Matthew 18 and the dynamic of how Jesus talks about dealing with conflict. And one of the things is that it seems like in some circumstances, the goal is always reconciliation, but it seems like sometimes in this world that's not possible. So I was wondering if I was getting that right from the passage when they were talking about, like, if they still won't settle things, then, like, treat them as a pagan or a tax collector. Yeah.
I both think there's profound wisdom in what Jesus says, and I struggle with how to apply it. The good thing is it gives you a way of processing it, and there are really two ways to look at that passage. I've went to it with the attitude of there's conflict going on.
Right.
It also is often and maybe well applied in church discipline, where someone has sinned objectively, and you're trying to bring them back on track. Where conflict can be that, but it's also different. But no, it doesn't always work. It's plain and simple. Is sometimes people just walk away. And I've seen plenty of examples, in fact, too many, where conflict leads to one person just leaving the church, leaving the group. And so there's never reconciliation. Not only is the issue not resolved,
right,
but there's not reconciliation. And the point of that I want to get across, I think Jesus is saying, is reconciliation is important, is valuable. not just resolving the issue, that's the thing you're disagreeing about, but seeking to reconciliation, restoration of the relationship, and to work towards that. On how do you, if that person is not willing to engage in that conversation, how do you treat them? Well, that's when it's like a tax collector or a pagan. But how did Jesus treat tax collectors and pagans? Well, he befriended them. Mm-hmm. He ate dinner with them. It doesn't mean we shut them out of our lives. It might mean we don't have them in the inner circle of leadership. Or, that might change how we relate to them as far as trusting them. But it doesn't mean we shut them out of our lives either.
Yeah, I think it's helpful just to kind of be like, even with reconciliation in the church, like, it doesn't mean that if there's if there's a big enough conflict or issue that happens, it doesn't mean that everything's going to automatically like revert back to how it was beforehand and everybody's all buddy. Like, sometimes it takes some time, and the relationship might look a little different on the other side.
That's where if you watch too many movies, it always ends up with perfect harmony in the end. Yeah. I mean, we have the body of Christ. We called to love each other even when there is differences in how we approach things. But have you ever seen something like this handled well in your time? Like, when have you seen conflict handled well within a Christian community?
Yeah. That example's more discipline. Conflict. I think one of the... so we had an issue on the leadership team I was in InterVarsity at one point. And a lot of it was an issue of just how did we approach evangelism? Okay. So it was one of those things of people versus numbers. Like, I don't want to think about the quantity. I just want to focus on the people. And then the others being like, well, but we won't know, like, maybe what tactics or what is working unless we look at the numbers type of thing. And the way that it was one of those, like, kind of finding a common ground, finding ways to still work with each other and kind of satisfy both ends. I'm trying to remember if there was like an exact conversation. I think actually one of the solutions that we came up with, though, as a leadership team, was giving people the space to be able to step down if the position they took didn't seem like it fit them anymore or wasn't what they were expecting. And so in some ways, instead of making someone suffer through a working relationship with each other on a leadership team, when it's just constant conflict and not necessarily like bad, just like constant tension or something like that, giving them the voice to be able to say, actually, this isn't what I was thinking, I would rather step down. And that actually made everything feel a lot healthier when we allowed that and didn't like be like, no, you signed up for a year, like you must fulfill your whole year.
Accommodating, finding ways to accommodate so that it could work.
Yep.
Yeah. I could think of so many different conflicts that are small, and it's hard to use as the one that came to mind just now is we were trying to do a new type of outreach service, and one of the key people involved, we wanted to move it to our fellowship hall instead of the sanctuary because we were trying to engage non-church people, and one of the people just couldn't see it. And it was a long night of arguing, and but he prayed about it, and then God says, even though I can't see it, I believe God's got something in mind, and so I'm just going to trust that you guys are. So he yielded, even though he was a pretty main leader in the church, and said, I'll in a sense trusting God that because there were other pretty much everyone else was in unanimity that we needed to go this direction. And so that's a Christian way to say, it's not that we are just, we never assert ourselves. He was quite assertive, but when he sensed God's leading through these other people, he trusted that God was doing something.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good one. Okay, so then the next part, you started talking about the different peacemaking responses that, we're going to explore more in the next couple weeks. And so the first one was go to higher ground, or like seeking to honor God in all our situations. Second was get real about ourselves. The third was gently engage others. And the fourth, get together on lasting solutions. And so the one that I wanted to I had a question on was the second one, which was get real about ourselves. And I feel like that can be really hard. So I was wondering, especially if like you're riled up in the heat of the moment type of thing. So I was wondering if you had any tips to share. And I feel like as I'm asking it, one of the answers you already kind of gave was that you do journaling as part of your spiritual disciplines. So I feel like that's a good example.
That is how God has guided me. But the problem is that's after the fact. Right, and that's not what you're asking, but I still think it's part of it in thinking things through. I mean, a lot of this could mean going to people later and said, man, I'm sorry, I approached that all wrong. And it's not that we never get heated. It's that when we do, we see it by God's help, and then we're humble enough to apologize for it. And and ideally we'd see it while there's still a chance to make it right, or own up to it. I think in the moment, it's setting the principles in your head, like I don't speak evil of others. I don't raise my voice. I don't, whatever it is. It's like, what are the things that show anger? Trying to say, I don't do these things, so if I want to do them, that's a sign to me that we got to back off for a minute or need some help. Praying with people is, if you're starting to get there, hey, can we pray about this? Or learning to hit the pause button. Those are some of the things that I think in the moment can back away from the falling off the cliff. Do you have any suggestions on that? Like how to...
I was trying to think. Like, for me, I know usually, especially if I'm like in a heated argument with someone, usually it means that I am not noticing that my emotions are like getting... English.
Heated?
Yeah, I guess that works.
Yeah.
And so for me, like, stopping, like, just pausing and breathing and being like, okay, like, what am I actually feeling right now that's influencing how I'm thinking and responding type of thing. I've realized after the fact several times that I've had to do that, and I'm trying to actually do that more and just be like, okay, stop. Like, what am I, like, what are the things that I'm basing my argument off of, or that, like, what are the truths I'm assuming, are they actually correct type of thing. Like,
that's exactly what getting real about yourself is.
Yeah.
It's thinking through, what part may have you played in what's going on. Yeah. I'm been reading Psalm 39, and just part of it came to mind. It talks about, my heart became hot within me. As I mused, the fire burned, and then I spoke with my tongue. And when it goes then, but when he speaks with his tongue, he speaks to God, the Lord, not to the people he's angry with. But that whole image of our heart became hot within me, and the fire burning. Yeah. And then I spoke with my tongue, Lord, help me see this. And so.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, and I think the only other one that an idea that I've heard of that I've used a lot is this idea of like a lightning rod. And so like sometimes if it's a minor offense that just rubs us the wrong way, type of thing, or it's some external processing is needed. I've found that, like, if you go to a confidant and just kind of let everything out, to let all the emotions out, and something, I feel like, that's definitely something we could do to God in prayer too, but sometimes being able to do it to a person we trust, who's a third party, or who won't, who will just kind of ground you, and then maybe say one or two things, but won't, like, go and spread it or take it personally or something like that.
Yeah, doing it in a way that you're not gossiping or slandering, but you're getting it out. And also knowing that, are they the kind of person that wants to work you up?
Right.
Because you have, some people like, oh yeah, you go tell them.
Yeah.
And you got to know who you can talk to about that stuff.
Yeah, not somebody to work you up, but somebody to ground you as a lightning rod. And so...
Oh, okay, I see, the lightning rod.
Yeah, so, like, my one friend, like, if one of us is heated, we'll just call the other and be like, okay, I need a lightning rod right now. And then you're just like, okay, like, just throw it at me, I will ground you, and then we'll talk about it. And it can help, sometimes it can help to have an outside person help give you this perspective of where you might have gone wrong. Like, well, did you consider, like, you said they did this, but did you consider that this is how you responded, and that might not have been helpful? So. Well,
and what did Paul say? I plead with Euodia, and Syntyche to agree with each other in the Lord, and I turn to you, my fellow yoke fellow. It has this weird word, and you don't know if Paul's actually talking about a person called Syzygus, or if he's talking about the yoke fellow, the fellow people there. Help these women agree with each other.
Yeah.
These women have labored with me in the gospel. Obviously they love the Lord. Obviously they love the kingdom. Mm-hmm. This shouldn't be that hard. So help them, and we need each other to do this, because, we're not as good as we think. Was that one of my points?
Yeah, the first week. We're not as good at this.
We're not as good at this as we think we are. Mm-hmm. And as much as I've thought about it the last 10 years since I think it's been 9 years since I first took the training, I'm like, I still think I need to work on it a lot. So I figure if I keep doing this as a sermon series, eventually I'll have a handle on it.
I had a professor say that the third time through teaching something is when you finally actually learn it.
Okay.
So you only got to do it one more time.
Well, this might be my fourth, actually.
Oh.
So,
never mind.
But
I didn't say
twice
anything.
as a sermon series. The other times have been in smaller groups. But, yeah.
Okay. Cool. I think that's all the questions that I have for today.
Okay. Well, so I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
Is looking ahead, like what do you think would be helpful to get into? You've kind of went that way a little bit, but what's...
Yeah.
What of the rest of the series would you think I need to hear this the most?
Yeah, I think that I'm thinking two things. So one is, we kind of talked about it before we hit the record button, of just like as many, like a lot of this is situational. Uh-huh. And so as many examples of, I'm a big proponent of examples. And so as many as possible that look differently, that would work in different situations with different people, would definitely be helpful. And I think the other one is actually really just the, like, kind of a twofold of encouraging and, like, equipping us so that, like this is resolving conflict Jesus' way. Or like, in a vision of what Revelations could look like type of thing. It seems like it's possible. Like, it's something worth and that, like, I can actually work towards in my life. So this kind of that constant encouragement of the, like, no, like, we can actually do this better. And let's, like, it's worth the work to do it better.
Yeah. Yeah, and we can be encouraged, because it can work, and it does work. Mm-hmm. When you start to get a handle on it. And you hit the nail on the head earlier. When you're both people are in the Lord and they're both wanting the same thing, I think it's definitely within reach. Mm-hmm. Simply on a theological level, we are united by the Spirit.
Right.
And Paul doesn't say create the unity in Christ. He says keep the unity. And it's created for us. It is a different level when you're dealing with people who don't share the same values, then it's a different ball game.
Mm-hmm.
But even then, the things we learn can be helpful. So I think it is worth it when we can get there. I think it's impactful when we can get there. And the example idea is why I do hope people engage in the discussion groups, because that's where we hope to hear from each other on, well, this situation happened. We had a great example in our discussion group. I won't share it, but just he went through and he kind of outlined how the conflict played out and what he did, and we were able to affirm him that, hey, he did well with this, and even though the result wasn't ideal.
Yep.
So, yeah, I'm glad people are engaged. I'm thrilled how many people. I kept having to reorder more workbooks because and we have a few left now because I did one more reorder than maybe we needed. So if someone hasn't gotten one yet, and I'm glad to see where the Wednesday night groups are overflowing, and I know some are doing on Sundays.
Yep.
And that's awesome.
Yeah.
So
no, definitely good to be able to kind of work through this together as a church.
Yeah.
So.
I pray this will undergird our ministry going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Well, Pastor Mitch, thank you for joining me again this week and for another great discussion. And we hope to see you or talk next week.
All right. Thanks, Jess.
Yep.